The phone rang at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday, exactly 14 hours before my daughter Chloe's wedding. I was sitting at the kitchen table of my farmhouse, finishing up the weekly payroll for my staff. "Hello, is this Pamela Brooks?" The voice on the other end sounded strained and overly polite. "Speaking," I replied, setting my pen down. "Hi, this is Sarah from Pristine Events. I'm coordinating Chloe and Brendan's wedding tomorrow." I took off my reading glasses. Chloe had insisted on hiring her own planner, courtesy of Brendan's wealthy parents. "What can I do for you, Sarah?" "I'm calling because, well, Chloe and her future mother-in-law have finalized the seating chart. They've asked me to inform you that your invitation has been revoked. They feel your presence might disrupt the aesthetic and flow of the day. They asked you not to come tomorrow." I looked out the kitchen window. Across the dark lawn, the silhouette of the grand reception barn stood tall against the night sky. The string lights were already tested and glowing softly. My late husband Arthur and I had spent 20 years building this property into the most sought-after event space in the county. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just felt a quiet, heavy clarity. Chloe had been pushing me away for months, embarrassed by my calloused gardening hands and sensible shoes, desperate to impress Brendan's country club family. "I see," I replied calmly. "Tell Chloe that's fine." "Thank you for being understanding." Sarah breathed a heavy sigh of relief. "I know this is awkward." "But Sarah, tell her one more thing for me." "Of course. Tell her I own the venue. I own the floral shop supplying the arrangements, and I own the catering kitchen providing the meals. They are all my businesses." The line went dead quiet. I could hear the faint sound of a car passing by her office. "Excuse me," Sarah finally whispered. I checked the clock on the wall. "Have a good night, Sarah. Things are going to look very different by morning." After hanging up, I walked to the stove and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. I didn't shed a tear. I was 64 years old, and I had buried a husband I loved dearly. I knew what real grief felt like. This wasn't grief. This was deep disappointment. For the past year, Chloe had treated me like a pesky neighbor rather than her mother. Whenever Brendan's parents visited, she would ask me to stay in the main house, claiming my work clothes would give them the wrong impression. She wanted the wedding at my property because it was beautiful, but mostly because it was free. I had happily covered the costs of the food, the staff, and the tens of thousands of imported flowers she demanded. I did it because she was my daughter. But tonight, a hard line had been crossed. I was being uninvited to a party I was paying for, hosted on the land I owned, because I didn't fit their aesthetic. I took my keys from the hook by the door and walked out into the cool night air. The gravel crunched under my boots as I made my way to the event barn. The tables were set with crystal glasses and gold chargers. The floral centerpieces crafted by my team just hours ago sat perfectly in the center of each table. It was a stunning room. Arthur would have been proud of how far we'd come. I walked into the catering kitchen attached to the barn. The commercial refrigerators were humming, filled with prime rib lobster tails and delicate appetizers. I turned off the main lights and locked the heavy steel doors. I took out my master key and disabled the electronic keypad for the main entrance. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah, the planner. "Pamela, please tell me you were joking." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my staff group chat. "To all Saturday shift workers, the wedding is canceled. You will all receive your full day's pay. Enjoy the weekend." I set my alarm for 6 o'clock and went back to sleep. At exactly 6 a.m., my phone began to vibrate against the nightstand. I let it ring while I washed my face, brushed my teeth, and put on a comfortable pair of slacks and a simple sweater. When I finally walked into the kitchen to start the coffee maker, I had 14 missed calls. Most were from Sarah. The latest was from Chloe. I poured my coffee, taking a moment to appreciate the sunrise over the eastern hills. Then I dialed Chloe's number. She answered on the first ring. "Mom, what is going on?" Her voice was frantic, lacking the polished, measured tone she usually used around her fiancé's family. "Sarah just called me in a panic. She went to the venue to let the decorators in, and her access code doesn't work. The doors are locked." "I know," I said, taking a sip from my mug. "I changed the codes last night." "Why would you do that?" "The wedding is at 2 o'clock. Turn it back on right now." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Chloe." I pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. "You made it very clear last night that my presence at your wedding would be disruptive. I respect your decision. But this is my property, my food, and my flowers. If I am not welcome, neither are they." "You can't be serious," she practically screamed. "You're ruining my wedding because you're throwing a tantrum over a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding. You had your planner call to uninvite me 12 hours before the ceremony. That was a choice. Brendan's mother felt it would be awkward. You don't even know they're friends?" "Mom, you would have been sitting there alone anyway. I was trying to save you from embarrassment." "You were trying to save yourself," I corrected her, keeping my voice steady. "The venue is closed, Chloe. You can't do this. We paid for things." I looked at the thick folder on my counter. "No, I paid for everything. Check your receipts." "Mom, open the doors right now." Chloe's voice had lost its frantic edge, replacing it with the sharp, demanding tone I despised. "Brendan's parents have guests flying in from London and New York. You are humiliating us. You made a choice." I repeated, feeling the warmth of the coffee mug against my palms. "I am simply making mine. I will not host people who treat me like an unwanted employee in my own home." There was muffled shuffling on the other end, followed by a new, sharply manicured voice. It was Margaret, Brendan's mother. "Pamela, dear, let's be reasonable." Margaret began using the syrupy voice she reserved for waitstaff. "I understand feelings are hurt. It was a stressful decision regarding the guest list. But locking the doors to the venue we selected is incredibly petty. We need to get in to set up the string quartet." "Margaret," I replied, staring out at the empty driveway. "You didn't select a venue. You accepted a free venue that I built and own. And as the owner, I have decided to close it for the day." "Listen here." Margaret's tone hardened instantly. "We have highly influential people arriving in a few hours. I will not allow you to ruin my son's day over your little bruised ego. You will open those doors, or I will have Brendan force entry." I chuckled softly. "You have no rights to my private residence or my commercial property, Margaret. There is no contract. There is no lease agreement. It was a gift to my daughter, which I have retracted. If anyone steps onto my property, they are trespassing." I didn't wait for her to sputter a reply. I tapped the red button and set the phone face down on the counter. I wasn't trying to teach them a lesson. I was simply done. Done being small so they could feel big. Done apologizing for being exactly who I was. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a small weekend bag. It was time to leave. I packed lightly 2 changes of clothes, my favorite book, and my toiletries. I had a small cabin near the lake about 2 hours away that Arthur and I bought years ago. It was quiet, disconnected, and exactly what I needed today. As I zipped up the bag, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked out the front window. A sleek, black SUV had pulled up to the main iron gates at the bottom of the driveway. The gates were heavily padlocked, a security measure I implemented years ago to keep out curious teenagers. Chloe and Brendan stepped out of the vehicle. Chloe was wearing her silk getting-ready robe, her hair half-pinned in curlers. She grabbed the iron bars, shaking them, yelling something I couldn't hear through the thick glass of my windows. I picked up my keys and walked out onto the front porch. The morning air was crisp. I walked down the long driveway, slowly feeling the gravel shift under my sensible shoes. When I reached the gate, Chloe glared at me through the bars. "Open this gate, Mom. You are acting like a child." "Good morning, Brendan." I nodded to her fiancé, who stood slightly behind her, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Brooks," Brendan mumbled, staring at the ground. "I am not going to ask you again," Chloe snapped. "Sarah is parked down the road with the makeup artists. Margaret is having a panic attack at the hotel. Open the gate, let us in, and we can pretend this didn't happen." I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. I saw a stranger molded by entitlement and a desperate need for approval from people who would never truly respect her. "There is nothing to open, Chloe. The staff has been sent home. The kitchen is locked. The flowers are in the coolers. The wedding here is not happening." "But my guests," she cried, her voice cracking. "Where are we supposed to go?" "That sounds like a question for your wedding planner." Chloe gripped the bars, her knuckles turning white. "You can't just take the food and the flowers. Those are for my wedding. Even if we have to go to a public park, we need the food. The catering was provided by my company, Chloe. I bought the ingredients, I paid the chefs. The floral arrangements were designed by my staff on my payroll. They belong to my business." I kept my voice, even refusing to match her rising panic. "I'll pay you for them." Brendan suddenly spoke up, reaching for his wallet. "Whatever the cost is, I'll write you a check right now. Just let us have the catering trucks and the flowers." I looked at him. "The catering package you selected is valued at $25,000. The floral arrangements are $12,000, plus the holiday weekend rush fee." I knew he didn't have it. His parents had money, but Brendan worked a mid-level corporate job and lived beyond his means. His hand stopped mid-reach. He swallowed hard. I can't clear that today. I know you can't." I turned my attention back to Chloe. "You both made a deliberate choice to exclude me from a milestone event because I wasn't refined enough for your new family. That is your right. But it is my right to decide who benefits from my hard work and my money." "Mom, please." The anger in Chloe's eyes began to crack, replaced by genuine desperation. Tears finally spilled over her cheeks, ruining her carefully applied foundation. "I'm sorry." "Okay, I'm sorry." Margaret said those things. "I'm sorry I listened to her. Please don't ruin my life." I felt a brief familiar pang in my chest, the mother's instinct to fix everything, to soothe the pain, to make the bad things go away. I had done it when she scraped her knee, when she failed a test, when she got her first heartbreak. But she wasn't a child anymore. She was a 30-year-old woman who had casually thrown me away to impress her mother-in-law. "I'm not ruining your life, Chloe. I'm just setting a boundary." Chloe wiped her face, leaving streaks of mascara on her hands. Okay, look. I'll call Sarah right now. I'll tell her to put your chair back. You can come to the wedding. You can walk me down the aisle. Whatever you want." She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she scrolled. "I'll make Margaret apologize to you. I will." I watched her frantic movements. It wasn't an apology born out of love or realization. It was an apology born out of necessity. She didn't want me there. She wanted my venue. She wanted my resources. "No thank you, Chloe," I said quietly. She stopped scrolling and stared at me, bewildered. "What do you mean, no? I'm inviting you. I'm giving you what you want. You think I want a forced invitation to a party where everyone, including the bride, considers me an embarrassment?" I shook my head slowly. "I don't want to be at your wedding, Chloe. Not anymore." "Then what do you want?" she yelled, hitting the iron gate with her palm. "I want to be left alone." I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a small velvet-lined box. I slipped it through the iron bars and placed it on the stone pillar. "These were your grandmother's pearl earrings. I had intended to give them to you today before you put your dress on. You should still have them." Chloe looked at the box, then back at me. You're really doing this. You're actually turning your back on me on my wedding day. No, I replied, turning my back to walk up the driveway. I'm just walking away from the door you closed. If you walk away now, you will never see me again. She screamed after me. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking toward my house. Back inside, I picked up my weekend bag. I locked the front door of the farmhouse, double-checked the security cameras from my phone, and walked out the back door to where my sturdy Subaru was parked. As I drove down the private access road that bypassed the main gates, I saw Chloe and Brendan's SUV still parked at the entrance. Margaret's silver Mercedes had arrived and parked behind them. I watched in my rearview mirror as Margaret stepped out, pointing her finger aggressively at Chloe. I turned onto the county highway and accelerated. The tension in my neck, which had been building for months, slowly began to release. My phone buzzed continuously on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. Texts from Sarah the planner. Mrs. Brooks, please. We have 150 guests arriving in 4 hours. Is there any compromise? We can pay a rental fee. I ignored it. The business was closed. They could figure it out. By noon, I reached the lake cabin. It smelled of pine and old books. I opened the windows to let the breeze in, made a simple sandwich, and sat on the porch looking out at the water. For the first time in a year, my chest didn't feel tight with anxiety about whether I was saying the right thing around Chloe's new family, or wearing the right clothes, or holding my fork correctly. I was just Pamela. Around 3 p.m., the calls stopped. I imagined they had found a public park, a restaurant, or perhaps Margaret had to suffer the indignity of hosting the reception in her own pristine backyard. It didn't matter to me. I spent the afternoon reading. I watched the sun set over the lake. I felt a profound sense of peace. I had spent my entire life taking care of others, my husband, my business, my daughter. Today, I finally took care of myself. I slept deeply that night without a single dream. I stayed at the cabin until Tuesday morning. I went fishing, baked a loaf of bread, and read 3 books. When I finally turned my phone's notifications back on, I had over 100 messages. There were angry texts from Brendan's family calling me selfish and unhinged. There were long rambling voice notes from Chloe swinging wildly between rage and victimhood. She blamed me for the fact that they ended up getting married in a local community center with cold-cut sandwiches from a grocery store. I deleted them all without replying. When I returned to the estate on Tuesday afternoon, the property was exactly as I had left it. Quiet, beautiful, and completely mine. I called my head chef and my floral manager. We donated the prepared food to a local women's shelter, and the flowers were delivered to a nearby nursing home. Nothing went to waste. On Wednesday, I sat down at my desk and looked at the financial ledgers. The estate was highly profitable. I had been planning to hand over the management to Chloe in a few years, assuming she would want to run the family business. It was now crystal clear she had no respect for the business, only what it could buy her. I picked up the phone and called a property management firm I had dealt with in the past. Hello, David. It's Pamela Brooks. I'm thinking it's time for me to step back. I'd like to discuss a long-term lease agreement for the estate. I want your company to run the weddings from now on. We set up a meeting for the following week. I was going to retire. Later that afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up the driveway. The gates were open now. I watched from the porch as Chloe got out and marched up the steps. She looked exhausted. We need to talk, she demanded, crossing her arms. I stayed in my rocking chair. I'm listening. Margaret hasn't spoken to me in 3 days, Chloe said, her voice shaking. Brendan is humiliated. Our wedding was a joke. People were eating potato chips on folding chairs. Are you happy now? I'm at peace, Chloe. That's better than happy. She scoffed, pacing the porch. Well, since you saved so much money by ruining my wedding, Brendan and I expect you to help with the down payment on our house. Margaret's family isn't going to help us anymore because of what you did. I looked at her truly amazed by her audacity. She still saw me purely as a resource. No, Chloe. She stopped pacing. What do you mean, no? You owe me. I don't owe you anything. I housed you, fed you, educated you, and offered to pay for a beautiful wedding. You threw the last part away because you were ashamed of me. I stood up, smoothing my slacks. I have leased the estate to a management company. I'll be receiving a monthly check, and I plan to spend my time traveling and enjoying the life your father and I built. You're cutting me off, she whispered, horrified. I am enforcing a boundary. I am your mother, not your bank, and certainly not a secret to be hidden away. I opened the front door to head inside. You wanted to impress Brendan's family so badly. You are their family now. You can figure it out with them. Mom, you can't. Have a good life, Chloe. You know where I am when you learn how to treat me with respect. I stepped inside and shut the heavy oak door. The lock clicked with a solid, satisfying sound. I walked into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and looked out the window at the gardens. The sun was shining, the property was quiet, and for the first time in a very long time, my house truly felt like home. I smiled, pulled out a travel brochure for Italy, and poured my tea.